Hey everybody. So this video is actually a two-part collab. The other part is gonna be on SouthernCannibal's channel. So when you finish this video, head on over there and show him some love. Anyways, let's get to the stories. This happened to me and my friends in 1988, but we were actually just talking about it again the other day, and I thought I would share it to see if anyone has thought as to what it could have been. To give some background, this story involves myself, my boyfriend Andy, his cousin Mark, and his girlfriend Tracy. It was a Saturday night, and we were doing our usual weekend thing of riding quads up in the mountains behind Andy's house. His family owned several hundred acres, so we were on his property, and this property had been in his family for as far back as the early 1900s. The property had 4 houses on it and a huge garage. All of our parents were down at the main house, just hanging out and playing cards. As I stated, this was the norm for us on the weekends. This particular weekend, my quad was not running very well, and since we didn't want to deal with it breaking down while we were up on the trails, I just decided to ride with Andy. We had been riding for about an hour and decided to stop and take a break. We had a little place we kind of set up off the trail with logs so that we could sit and hang out. The night was a full moon, so we really had no need for any lights. We could see pretty much everything. It was beautiful. So we were sitting there talking about stuff and laughing and joking when all of a sudden, Tracy just got the most terrified look on her face. She was looking straight behind me and she began to shake and she had tears streaming down her face. I stood up and walked over to her and asked her what was wrong, and she was literally frozen in fear. I turned and looked in the direction that she was looking, and that was when I saw it. I stood straight up and kind of stood in front of Tracy. I grabbed Andy and told him to look at the top of the tree line, and he grabbed Mark. I wanted to make sure that we all saw what Tracy was looking at. I'm going to describe what we saw in the best way I can. It had a big, husky body, like a bear, but its head looked something like you would see on a caveman. It was on all 4, and its legs looked like horse legs. Nothing on this thing looked like it belonged on it. It was like it was morphed into all different kinds of things. Its eyes were blue, like what you would see on a flame. Needless to say, we were scared. This thing was starting to growl at us, and slowly step forward. We started backing up. I told Tracy not to run, but to just start making her way back to her quad, and put it in neutral, and start backing it up. We got her going, and she was making her way back down the trail, to a spot where she could just coast down the trail, when that thing lunged at us. We got on our quads, and Andy grabbed his rifle that he keeps with him and fired a warning shot at it, and to also get the attention of the adults down at the house. That was our way of letting them know that there was a problem, since there were no cell phones. So as we were making our way down the trail, Andy was walking backwards and keeping an eye on this thing because it was still behind us, kind of stalking us. You could see it because of its eyes. We were about halfway down when his dad and uncles reached us, and Tracy basically collapsed at their feet. They thought something was medically wrong, and that was when Mark told them to look down the trail and look for the blue, flaming eyes. His uncle spotted it and turned his spotlight on, and we were stunned, to say the least. This thing had no hair, and it looked as though it was inside out or something. It was the nastiest thing I have ever seen in my life. Now, not to upset anyone, but they did start shooting at it. They thought they had hit it, but we were not able to track any blood, or tracks for that matter. We went back down to the house for the rest of the night, and the next morning, we all gathered and went back up looking for anything that would lead us to what this thing was or where it had came from. We could find no trace of anything, and we never saw it again. Tracy never went back out with us because she was completely terrified. I have always been fascinated with things that may be paranormal. The whole time I was looking at this thing, that was what kept going through my mind. I truly believe it was some kind of demon or goblin, whatever word you want to give it. So we continued to keep going out and was just a little more mindful of our surroundings, but never saw it again.
This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to tell it. My friend is of Wickanuv heritage, a Native American tribe who settled the Pacific Northwest coast. He's quite the character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10" and has the blackest eyes you could ever imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of giants. He was working at a gas station up north back in 1992, and he pretty much always worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when he was relieved. Business wasn't exactly booming at night, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and they were few. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer of the ways of the old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes and some soda, and returned to his car. Nothing unusual, but as my friend looked out the window toward the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now, the window is located on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof are pretty strong halogen lights which shine onto the gas station. This gives the gas station not only an eerie lighting with blinds casting long striped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think too much of it. Even if it was a wolf, he was inside, and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common there, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of the TV. A couple of hours go by and not a single customer has entered since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that. But it came from the back and behind the building they keep the garage. The gas station had been visited before by scavenging homeless people, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever ventured there to leave, as he had had enough. His presence alone would have scared anyone off, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walking past the windows he was just sitting by. As he turned the corner, he shines the flashlight to the dumpsters. As the cone of the light hits the dumpsters, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, tearing through the garbage. It wasn't a dog, though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as my friend. It couldn't be a bear, as it was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station and he wasn't followed. He locked the door, stayed inside the whole night, and quit the next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a Skinwalker, a shape-shifting creature that are a common occurrence in Native American lore and culture. So, sorry for the absence of blood, guts, and glory. It was just a really creepy story.
My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard. In the cool night of the Arizona desert, the horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his dark white eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, he began. I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on a 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. The fire sparked, jolting me out of the story. "What's next?" I asked. "Settle down, boy. You'll hear soon enough." Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember, too, when the engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "Damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road as it coasted to a halt. "Stay there, son," as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up something like one of the dead bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too. The back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called. "Pa! Pa!" No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa's door. I saw a shadow bound across the road, through both dim beams of light, across the partly open, domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side, and he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweating and clammy. "Well, what happened? What about your father? What did you see?" He sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, there were legends. Old legends. Older than the rock cairns out in the valley. Older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. Than the old Injun chiefs and their shamans. The Apache and Cherokee, and all of them old tribes and First Peoples. They told tales about dark magic, a deal made with the old spirits, a blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and bodied forward into his tale, across the fire and the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and old mountains. He bodied forward. They called them skinwalkers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote. But messed up, boy. Long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms, and standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Wily, too. They could change their voice to match a person you knew, or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big and fast. Only for a second it ran across the road, gray and mottled. Muscle flexing under its legs, hoofs clomping on the road, stringy, muscled, hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes, and I swear, boy, I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock, in fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens, charged and full with power. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking as Grandfather told this story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legends say, maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fist up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me." He grabbed the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and Ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run, or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma," as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out into the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him, after all. "But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom?" "No, boy. I knew. Because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us, boy." My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. "Son," he said, "don't look at it. Don't look at it." That's how I knew, boy.
This happened when I was 10 years old in Texas. We had gone out to a family party in DeSoto, Texas. It was probably close to about 3 in the morning. All the adults were inside talking and drinking while the kids were out in the backyard playing in the bounce house that was ordered. A bit into the fun we were having, we started noticing a strange smell, which I now considered the smell of sulfur, when one of my cousins had pointed at a goat near the fence in the field just watching us. So, being kids, we all get up against the little net to see it. Now, the strange thing about it was the way it let its mouth hang open, and how it was standing in the tall grass with its legs wobbling like he was gonna fall just staring at us. So, we all decide to go for a closer look, not thinking much of it, and that's when it got even weirder. The goat started making what sounded like excited grunts, and when we got near the fence, it let out a human-like but very distorted yell that sounded like it had its own echo, and it bolted for the fence on its hind legs and front legs, bouncing around as it ran. All of us started screaming and ran inside. Some of our parents heard us scream and met us at the back door, and we were able to see it run off into the tall grass, letting out that same yell. Upon telling everyone what happened, our grandparents were convinced it was an evil spirit, and began saying prayers and tossing holy water around the house, considering they were Catholic with very strong beliefs. And our drunk uncles and fathers went out with guns looking for it. Shortly after they came back, everyone decided it was time to go home. And a few weeks later, my grandparents decided to move because they also began to hear strange things. For the longest time, I was convinced it was a demon or the devil in disguise, since that's what my grandparents thought it was. But after doing some research, I personally believe it was a Skinwalker, and I hope I never see one again.
My experience was quite puzzling. I know it's paranormal though, just don't know what it was. But I'll tell you as I remember, and what I saw with my family one evening. Growing up, my family had a real strong bond. My aunts and uncles all live on the family plot near my parents' home. There's a cluster of homes, which is where we all live. We have livestock, sheep, horses, and some cows, which stay in our corrals. Each weekend we had family cookouts on most Sunday evenings, just to eat good and mingle. We grilled meats, and made side dishes to eat along with the main course, fry bread. One evening, we were outside of our house. It was our turn to host. Everyone took turns hosting the feastings. I remember it being almost around 9 p.m. It was hot, even though the sun was gone. On the Navajo Reservation in northeast Arizona, the sun will not set until after 9 p.m. Through summer, up until the longest day of the year, the sun sets real late. Then the sun travels back down south slowly, also getting earlier each evening. Well, this evening I remember it was late. The sun's glow was slowly going behind the ridge, about 30 miles west of my home, but it was enough to see still. I was sitting near my cousin and brothers, Alex and Jason. I don't remember what we were talking or laughing about, but I was facing in the direction of the sheep corral, which was about 600 to 800 feet south of my house. My parents, 2 uncles, their wives, my aunt and her hubby, my cousins, and my 2 younger siblings. We were sitting on the back porch, talking and relaxing. The sheep corral is made up of wood posts about 8 feet tall. I think 2.5 of that is buried under the sand in the ground, so you only see roughly 5 foot above ground of the post making the corral. The gate is made up of metal bars welded together in a square, with tubes going in the middle. Covering the gate from the outside is metal sheets. If you're a Navajo, you'll know we use them to cover the roof of our hay barns, shade for animals, shade houses, or sheds. Well, this is what I was looking at. The metal sheets of the gate, which I saw clearly. I could see the gate because it was sort of a gray-white color because of the glow from the sun. Everything else around it was dark and black. I remember staring, spacing out, looking at the gate, and all of a sudden, I saw something walk in front of the gate. I sat up because I was slouching back in my chair. As I blinked and squinted, looking at what it was, it looked very clear to me like it was a man figure walking. Then it stood there. I don't know which way it was looking, away from me or towards me, but it just stood there. I know we were sitting in the darkness because the flies and insects were attracted to the porch lights. We weren't too loud either. Pretty much, I know you couldn't hear us from the corral. At that moment, I got up and told my dad and everyone, "Look." My uncle mentioned it might be someone trying to steal some sheep or killed the sheep. The sheep belonged to my aunt and her hubby. So I got up. As I went to walk off the porch steps, my dad said, "Wait." My dad, uncles, and cousins got up and started walking down the steps. We all walked slowly and quietly towards the corral. There's a wash between my house and the corral. From in the wash, we could clearly see someone was standing in front of the corral. My dad whispered to my uncles, "Let's split. You guys go from the left. We'll come from the right. You boys go straight at it." We waited for everyone to move. Then we started walking towards it again. This thing knew we were coming. It started running away. It sure was a man figure, but it was weird. As it was running, it sounded like horse hooves, not shoes running on the sand. We took off after it. We got real close to grabbing it while running full speed after it down the dirt road. Just as we were going to throw it down, it was gone. We stopped, and by that time everyone caught up to us and asked what happened. Where'd it go? It had a foul odor when we were chasing it. It smelled like how dead cows and horses smell when you pass by one dead along the highways. I don't know what this thing was and what we just chased, but I thought it was a man. But hearing the steps when it was running, it sounded like a horse running, but it was a man-looking figure. No one had a clue what it was or where it went, and as we walked back, my uncle came with a flashlight, so we tracked the path we came, looking for footprints. There was nothing but our footprints accounted for. Even near the corral, we only saw sheep and dog footprints. That was really strange. I don't know if it's a ghost or Skinwalker. All I know is it's something 7 guys couldn't explain.
For a little background on my story, I live in a small town outside Kansas City, Kansas. Technically a part of it because of the unified government, but the area I live in has a lot of history around it, and there was a lot of Native American activity in the area. My house has a long driveway and is in the middle of a stand of woods. The woods have been there for as long as there's records of the area. When we first moved into our home, everything seemed pretty normal. But after about living there for a month, that's when abnormal stuff started happening. Pounding on the roof, animal scratches on our vehicles, and we started finding a lot of dead animals on the property. We even contacted the Kansas State Game Wardens, but couldn't find any evidence of poaching or poisoning or even the animals getting hit by cars. So after about 2 years of this, my brother moves back in and brings his dog with him. One night at about 11 p.m., the dog starts whining to be let out. So I put him in the leash and walk him around our yard. Suddenly, he starts trying to yank me back towards the house. Then, this uneasy feeling washes over me and I notice something that smells like something rotting. I feel like someone was watching me, so I turn around and down by our garage, just inside the lights, I see this figure. It was about 5 foot tall, hunched over. It was very pale, almost translucent. It had small, deep-set, beady eyes and a deer-like face. A sense of pure terror washed over me. I've never been more scared of anything in my life, and to this day, I've never felt that level of fear. I ran back into the house and wake up my dad and brother. They grab some shotguns and run outside to check it out. All they find are some pretty deep scratch marks on the garage. The next day, we contacted the game wardens. I described what I saw and smelled, and they said it was probably a very sick deer that has contracted mange or something of the sort. Weird stuff kept happening for about another 2 or 3 years. Then we had that really bad drought and the stuff stopped occurring. So I don't know what the hell it was that I saw that night, but I personally believe it was a Skinwalker.
Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things, namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one. Here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has on average 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play at another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo Res. And we would also usually stay at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning. But this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. We were headed out, and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered the res. By this time, everyone was asleep, with it being about 2 in the morning. When we had crossed the res's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles per hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus, staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit, and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles per hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white, with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy shit, it's a Skinwalker. The Skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The Skinwalker just smiled at me, this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The Skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over the Skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds, he was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert, out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next school day in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing. To this day, I haven't seen another Skinwalker. It might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and res. And if I do have to go south, I go around, way around.
My uncle, aunt, and my cousins live in Utah, like 2 states over from me. They drive around a lot, especially for family reunions. My uncle often tells all the kids a story when we go camping, mostly since someone usually wants to hear it again. He was driving back home alone one night in the summer, He knew the area well and wasn't worried, but he was still kinda creeped out from, well, driving alone at night. He was in a long road of that sort of sparse, deserty area with the bushes and hills. My uncle then heard a weird noise like a chirp or something. The way he described it was the first part of that he that Michael Jackson makes without the second he. It sounds very ridiculous, I know, but unsettling in the cold, dark outdoors. And it seemed clear enough to not have just been a creaking of metal or something like that. Obviously, he got a little weirded out by it. He's a lively, tough dude in the company of others, but he hates being alone. My uncle heard it somewhat far away, but then he started hearing it again. It was almost ramping up, getting faster. It was also getting slightly louder. My uncle realizes that this meant it was getting closer. He sped up, but it continued to get closer. He looked to the left outside his car and saw something running almost parallel to his truck, pretty far off the road and inside the bush area, upright like a tall, skinny human. He said it was brown and furry and just bothered him. It wasn't horror movie monster scary, but it was something's wrong scary. He heard the moving of leaves. The noise was now basically constant and sounded different. Kind of like how a person sounds when they are very tired and speak every syllable in one breath of air. The animal thing sort of faded into the plants, but the noise started to fade as well. But the way that my uncle described it was like a train on the tracks that approaches you and then passes you. The thing was, though, he didn't feel any less scared, since now he feared it was in front of him and that he would see it clearly on the road. But nothing happened for the rest of the ride. He usually clears out the night with this story. Camping stories are fun, but they're sort of harmless. This one always gets everyone creeped out and thinking. Something that wouldn't have gone away if he told the story earlier. I want to tell you a story my cousin and I experienced in the summer of 2010. I'm full Navajo and my cousin's half native and half Mexican, but he's more Navajo to me. Over the summer I lived with my grandma and dad in the Shiprock in New Mexico, and in Farmington for school. My cousin and I were 14 when this happened at camp. We knew stuff always happened where we camped. For example, you'll hear coyotes howl. Where my uncle lives, his dogs are always barking and he has 5 pit bulls and 3 German shepherds. They're not mean dogs, but when it's night, they start barking and it sounds like they are fighting outside with something. On to the story. Since the age of 7, me and my cousin have always camped in Wheatfield, Arizona, and we stay at my uncle's for like a month. My aunt would sometimes come over and camp with us by the lake. We like staying there because we like fishing, playing with the dogs, and eating some mutton. We visit our friend who works at the store there and we hang out and fish sometimes. He's lived there for half his life and knows almost everything about the place. We sometimes ride his horses around the lake and fish while the horses rest. One night when me, my aunt, and my cousin were camping, my aunt said she was going to pick up one of her friends and get some munchies for us down in the Red Valley and Cove. When she left, we caught a trout and cooked it. We usually hear howling and people partying by the lake, but this particular night it was just 2 campers on the west side of the lake, and one by us who was sleeping. I got a weird feeling that there was something watching us in the tall bushes. I was shining my torchlight at the trees, but saw nothing. Then the coyotes started howling on the other side of the lake. They seemed to be getting closer and closer. I was freaking out because we heard one behind us howl. My cousin was putting his tackle box away, but decided to put a giant thick stick on top of it. Only an animal or person could move it. We put everything away as best as we could and went into the tent. For a while, we just kept hearing little footsteps behind our tent. We must have been in the tent for 15 minutes or so when we heard something outside the tent. Like something was digging into my cousin's tackle box. Something else was trying to open my aunt's tent, but luckily I tied fishing string. Then something else was putting out the fire, and I know no one was around our campsite or I would have heard louder footsteps. We had this feeling there were 6 of something because at the same time one was putting out the fire, one was trying to open my aunt's tent, one was bothering my cousin's tackle box, 3 we thought were behind our tent. It was a feeling we had. We knew they were skinwalkers because you could smell dead animals and feel something evil was around you. What freaked us out the most was we saw what looked like goat's feet and horns like a deer walk in front of the fire where we saw it clearly. My heart was pumping so hard I could feel it and hear it. They stayed there and kept trying to scare us, and they did. They kept saying our names over and over. We had bats with us in the tent, but we were too scared to do anything. I kept thinking we were going to die over and over. I kept praying to God that my aunt would come back soon and quick. I do believe in God, and I know He answered my prayer because after like 7 minutes into saying my prayer, my aunt finally came back. When she came back, I was so relieved but still shaking. She said she saw 6 men with skin on them, then ran off. The stick my cousin put on his tackle box was like 3 inches away from it. We were all freaked out that night because we heard growls in the middle of the night. I put ash around the tents because I wanted to be protected. I know this doesn't sound real, but this story is true. I know they are skinwalkers and they are real. Whenever me and my cousin tell our story, we start shaking because we are still scared of what happened that night. My aunt doesn't speak about what she saw because she believes if she does, they will come back for us. We've experienced a lot in the mountains over the summer, but this one is the one that we are scared of. I'm shaking now even telling you about it, but I wanted to tell our story. If you don't believe us, then go to Wheatfield, Arizona, in the mountains of the west side of New Mexico and east side of Arizona. Stay out there and wait for them to come, because I guarantee you something will happen.
I live in the mountains, about 10 miles outside of a small town. I live near a winding road highway, well known for its many fatal accidents, a lot of which happen to be collisions with animals, deer, small rodents, sometimes more often than not, mountain lions. I grew up in the country my whole life, so I've seen just about every wild animal my side of the state has to offer, whether alive or roadkill. Recently, I saw one that I could neither identify or rationalize. My husband and I had stopped by for dinner with his coworkers in the town down the windy road from our home. Once it grew close to midnight, I knew we should be heading home. My husband insisted he wanted to stay a bit longer to have a drink with his buddy. Reluctantly, I agreed he could stay, even though he knows I hate going home late at night by myself. We have about a half of a mile driveway leading to our home, which is blocked off by a padlocked gate. I get paranoid every time I have to get out of my car to unlock the gate, pull inside, and then relock the gate behind me. Not that I'm afraid of someone attacking me, but way up in the country, a wild animal mauling me. The number of mountain lions and bears in our area was definitely above average. I headed back home alone, my husband promising he'd be out for only another hour. I took the dangerous road extra cautiously in the evening. The thick cover of trees surrounding the road made it pitch black. After finally arriving at my road, I hit the gravel fast, eager to get inside. What I saw next made me slam my brakes so hard I fishtailed a bit and scattered gravel every which way. What I saw, barely 2 feet from my car, was incomprehensible. It looked almost like a human figure at first. Its ribs stuck out so far they took a barrel shape. It was hunched over, but if it stood straight, it had to be at least 8 foot tall. Tufts of matted hair all over its body, what skin shone through, appeared mangled, mutilated. Long limbs almost resembling human arms, but too thin and discolored. Its legs arched like wolves. It had no sign of a human face. The face had what seemed to be a snout that contained a sharp set of canine teeth that shone as it snarled at me. My eyes locked with its piercing yellows. It stared me down for what felt like an eternity. Then all of a sudden, it broke our gaze, swiftly disappearing into the woods. I was so scared I sat in my car until my husband arrived home an hour later. He had to knock on my window to get my attention. He questioned me about it once we were in the safety of our home. I've been dealing with paranormal experiences with spirits since I was a child, but my husband says he has never seen me this shook up before. I guess I'm not good with something that can rip me limb from limb. I'll take a ghost over that creature any day.